It was just a dog, get over it. Officer Ryan Blake scoffed after pulling the trigger in a quiet suburban yard, completely unaware that the calm black woman standing in front of him had direct access to the Pentagon. And within minutes, his life would begin to unravel beyond anything he could control. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The afternoon sun rested gently over the quiet Virginia neighborhood, casting soft light across trimmed lawns and quiet sidewalks. It was the kind of place where time moved slowly, where neighbors waved without thinking, where nothing ever seemed to break the rhythm of the day. Denise Carter stood in her front yard, her posture relaxed, her presence grounded in stillness. She wore simple, comfortable clothing, nothing that suggested anything beyond an ordinary life. Beside her, a medium-sized dog rested calmly, its attention shifting occasionally with the breeze, ears alert but body relaxed. The two moved together in quiet familiarity, small gestures, unspoken understanding, the kind of routine built over years. Denise held a cup of tea loosely in her hand, her gaze drifting across the street, not searching, just observing. There was something measured in the way she existed in the space. Not tense, not guarded, just aware. A car door closed somewhere in the distance. A lawn mower hummed faintly 2 houses down. The world moved exactly as it should. Then the sound came, sudden, disruptive, the low growl of an engine pulling too quickly into a space that did not require urgency. Denise's eyes shifted slightly toward the street as the patrol car rolled up hard against the curb, its presence sharp against the calm environment. The engine idled louder than it needed to be. The moment changed, not dramatically, but completely. The passenger door opened first, then the driver's. 2 officers stepped out, their movements already charged with something that did not match the quiet around them. Officer Ryan Blake moved with immediate purpose, his posture aggressive, his expression set. Officer Kevin Shaw followed behind, slower, his gaze scanning the area with less certainty. Denise did not move toward them. She did not step back. She simply remained where she was, her posture steady, her presence unchanged. The dog lifted its head slightly, alert now, sensing the shift. Before it could be fully understood, Blake approached quickly, his voice cutting through the calm without introduction. "We got a call about this property," he said. Denise met his gaze, her voice even. "What kind of call?" she asked. Blake did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer, his tone sharpening. "We will ask the questions," he said. The line had already been drawn, and in that moment, as the quiet afternoon gave way to something heavier, something deliberate, one truth settled into place. This was not about a complaint. This was about what they had already decided it was. And Officer Ryan Blake made that clear with every step he took forward. He did not slow down. He did not reassess. He moved closer to Denise Carter with the kind of confidence that came from assumption, not evidence. "We received a report about a dangerous animal," he said, his voice sharp, his tone already accusatory. Denise's gaze shifted briefly toward her dog, then back to him. "There is nothing dangerous here," she replied calmly. The dog remained still beside her, alert but not aggressive, its posture low, its attention fixed on the unfamiliar tension in the air. Officer Kevin Shaw stepped slightly to the side, his eyes moving between the dog and Denise, his posture cautious. "It does not look aggressive," he said quietly. Blake did not acknowledge him. "Step away from the animal," he ordered, his voice rising. Denise did not move immediately. She remained where she stood, her posture steady, her presence controlled. "There is no need for escalation," she said. Blake's jaw tightened. "I said step away," he snapped. The volume of his voice cut through the quiet street, drawing attention. A curtain shifted in a nearby house. A car slowed as it passed. The moment was no longer contained. Denise took a slow step back, not out of fear, but intention, creating space without surrendering control. "You are misreading the situation," she said. Blake shook his head, already committed to his version of events. "I'm not misreading anything," he replied. "I am handling it." The dog shifted slightly, moving closer to Denise's side, its movement small, protective, not aggressive. Blake reacted instantly, his posture tightening, his hand moving toward his weapon. "There it is," he said, as if confirming something he had already decided. Shaw stepped forward slightly, his voice lower now. "Ryan, it is not charging," he said. Blake ignored him completely. "Get back," he shouted, his voice louder, sharper, filling the space with urgency that did not match the reality. Denise's voice remained calm. "You do not need to do this," she said. The words landed, but too late. The moment had already moved past reason. Blake's stance shifted, his decision made before it could be questioned. The air tightened. The quiet neighborhood held its breath. And in that instant, as tension replaced clarity, one truth became unavoidable. This was no longer about safety. It was about control he was determined to prove. This was no longer about safety. It was about control he was determined to prove, and Officer Ryan Blake committed to it fully. His stance tightened, his grip firm, his voice cutting sharply through the air as if volume alone could justify what came next. "Back up," he shouted again, his tone now edged with urgency that did not match the reality in front of him. Denise Carter did not raise her voice. She did not step forward. She simply stood where she was, her posture steady, her presence grounded, her eyes fixed on him with a calm that refused to mirror his escalation. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. The words landed, but they did not stop him. Officer Kevin Shaw moved slightly to the side, his voice lower now, more urgent. "Ryan, wait," he began, but Blake did not listen. He could not. The moment had already passed the point of reconsideration. The dog shifted again, stepping slightly closer to Denise, its movement protective, cautious, not aggressive. It did not lunge. It did not bark. It simply moved. And that was enough for Blake. His reaction was immediate, his decision already made before it could be questioned. The sound broke the moment. Sharp. Final. Everything stopped. The air itself seemed to freeze in place as silence followed, heavy and absolute. Denise did not move at first. Her posture remained upright, her presence still, her eyes fixed forward. Then, slowly she looked down. The space beside her, once filled with quiet companionship, was now empty of movement. The shift was not loud. It was not chaotic. It was precise. And it changed everything. Shaw stepped forward immediately, his voice tight. "Ryan, what did you do?" he said, his tone no longer uncertain, but shaken. Blake exhaled. Sharply, his chest rising and falling as he tried to regain control of the moment. "It moved," he said quickly. "I had to act. The justification came too fast, too rehearsed, too empty." Denise's gaze lifted slowly, her eyes settling on him again. Her expression had not changed, but something behind it had. Something deeper. Still calm. Still controlled. But no longer passive. "No," she said quietly. "You chose to act." The distinction settled into the silence like weight. Around them, the neighborhood had gone completely still. A phone lowered slightly. A voice in the distance stopped mid-sentence. The moment had shifted beyond explanation. Blake stepped back slightly, his posture no longer fully steady, his voice attempting to recover its earlier force. "This was procedure," he said. "It was a threat." Denise held his gaze, her voice calm, unwavering. "No," she said again. "It was not." The certainty in her tone did not match the chaos he had created, and that was what unsettled him most. Shaw stood frozen now, his silence complete, his earlier hesitation replaced with something else entirely, recognition. Blake looked between them, his certainty slipping, his control unraveling in ways he could not yet understand. Because in that moment, as the silence held and the weight of what had just happened settled into place, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer something he could justify. It was something he would have to answer for. It was something he would have to answer for. And yet Officer Ryan Blake pushed forward as if the moment could still be reshaped by force alone. He stepped back slightly, his posture tightening again, his voice rising as he attempted to reclaim control of what had already slipped beyond him. "Secure the scene," he barked, his tone sharper now, louder, as if the command could overwrite what had just happened. Officer Kevin Shaw did not move immediately. He stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the ground. His expression tightened in a way that no longer hid what he understood. "Ryan, this is not right," he said quietly. Blake ignored him. He turned toward Denise Carter, his presence intrusive again, his voice dropping into something colder, more defensive. "You saw what happened," he said. "That animal was a threat." Denise did not raise her voice. She did not step forward. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, her composure absolute. "No," she said softly. "You made it one." The words landed with a precision that cut deeper than anything louder could have. Blake exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if rejecting something he could not fully process. "We will document this," he said quickly. "We will handle it properly." Denise's expression did not change. "Yes," she replied. "You will." The certainty in her tone unsettled him again, not because it challenged him, but because it did not need to. Around them, the neighborhood had fallen into complete silence. Neighbors stood still, their phones no longer hidden, their attention fixed openly now. The moment had moved beyond explanation. It had become something undeniable. Blake glanced toward the street, noticing the eyes, the stillness, the weight of what had been witnessed. For a brief moment, something surfaced, doubt, recognition, a quiet awareness that the situation had changed in a way he could not control. But pride moved faster. It always did. He straightened, his voice rising again. "We're done here," he said. "Clear out." The command echoed, but it no longer carried authority. It carried urgency. Officers began to shift, their movements less certain, less structured, as if they were no longer part of an operation, but part of something they did not fully understand. Denise remained still, her posture unchanged, her presence steady in a way that now defined the entire scene. She had not reacted. She had not escalated. She had simply allowed the moment to exist exactly as it was. And in doing so, she had transformed it completely. "You should make sure your report is complete," she said calmly. Blake turned toward her again, irritation flashing. "It will be," he replied. Denise held his gaze. "Every detail," she added. "Every action." The phrasing lingered, heavier now, sharper. Blake let out a short breath, dismissing it with a faint shake of his head. "We will handle it," he said. Denise's voice remained steady. "You already have," she replied. The silence that followed was different. Not empty, but final. Because in that moment, as the officers began to withdraw and the noise of the scene faded into stillness, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer something he could explain away. It was something that had already begun to move beyond him. It had already begun to move beyond him. And Sergeant Ryan Blake felt it, even as he tried to force the moment back under his control. He stepped closer again, his posture rigid, his voice rising as if louder words could stabilize something that was already unraveling. "You're going to need to answer some questions," he said, his tone sharper now, more defensive than authoritative. Denise Carter did not move. She stood where she had been from the beginning, her posture steady, her presence grounded, her gaze fixed on him with quiet clarity. "So are you," she replied. The simplicity of the response unsettled him more than any argument could have. Blake exhaled sharply, turning slightly as if to break the weight of her gaze. "We are handling this according to procedure," he said, his voice tightening. Everything that happened here was justified. The words sounded rehearsed. "Hello." Officer Kevin Shaw shifted beside him, his silence now heavy with recognition. "Ryan, we need to call this in," he said quietly. Blake shook his head immediately. "We will call it in when we are done," he replied. Denise's voice came calmly, precise. "You're already done," she said. Blake turned back toward her, irritation flashing again. "You do not get to decide that," he snapped. Denise held his gaze, her expression unchanged. "You decided at the moment you acted without cause," she said. The words settled into the space between them, heavier now, sharper, impossible to ignore. Around them, the neighborhood remained still, but the silence had changed. It was no longer passive. It was aware. Phones were still raised. Eyes were still watching. The moment had not faded. It had solidified. Blake glanced toward the street again, then back at her, his certainty slipping further. "You think this is going somewhere?" he asked, his voice lower now, less stable. Denise did not hesitate. "It already has," she said. Shaw's posture shifted again, his attention fully drawn now. "Ryan, we need to report this immediately," he said, his voice tighter. Blake did not respond right away. For a brief moment, something surfaced: instinct, doubt, the recognition that the situation had moved beyond him. But pride moved faster. It always did. He straightened, forcing control back into his posture, his voice rising again. "We will handle it," he said. Denise's gaze remained steady. "No," she replied softly. "You will answer for it." The distinction landed with finality. Blake said nothing. He could not, because in that moment, standing in the same yard where he had believed he was in control, one truth had become undeniable. This was no longer something he could contain. It was something that had already begun to reach beyond him, moving toward a consequence he could not stop. It had already begun to reach beyond him, and for the first time, the noise of the moment began to collapse into something quieter, something far more dangerous. The officers had stopped moving as quickly now. The urgency that once filled the yard had thinned, replaced by a strange stillness that no one seemed willing to acknowledge out loud. Sergeant Ryan Blake stood in the center of it, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the scene as if searching for something that could restore control. "All right," he said, his voice lower now, more measured. "We are wrapping this up." The words were meant to end it, to define it, to contain it. Denise Carter stood exactly where she had been, her posture upright, her presence steady, her gaze calm. She had not moved. She had not reacted. And that stillness now carried more weight than everything that had come before it. Blake stepped closer, his tone shifting again, quieter, more controlled, as if proximity could recover what had been lost. "We will file the report," he said. "You will receive documentation. If there are any issues, you can address them through proper channels." Denise looked at him, her expression unchanged, her voice even. "I will," she said. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him again. It was not resistance. It was certainty. Blake nodded once, as if confirming his own version of events. "Good," he replied. He turned slightly, preparing to leave, to step away from the moment before it could grow any further. Then Denise spoke again. "You should make sure your report is complete." The words stopped him, not abruptly, but enough. He turned back, irritation flickering. "It will be," he said. Denise held his gaze. "Every detail," she added. "Every decision." The phrasing lingered. Sharper now, more deliberate. Blake let out a short breath, a faint, dismissive laugh slipping through. "That is how reports work," he replied. Denise's voice remained calm. "Good," she said, "because when this is reviewed, there will be no space for explanation." The word reviewed settled into the air, heavier than anything else. Officer Kevin Shaw's posture shifted immediately, his attention sharpening. Blake noticed, but forced himself past it. "Reviewed by who?" he asked, his tone edged with mockery. Denise did not answer right away. She simply looked at him, calm, unwavering, as if the answer did not need to be spoken. Then she said quietly, "You will find out soon." The certainty in her voice did not match the situation, and that was what unsettled him most. For a brief moment, instinct surfaced again. Doubt, recognition, a warning he could not define. But pride moved faster. It always did. Blake shook his head, dismissing it completely. "We are done here," he said firmly. He turned away, signaling to his officers. "Move out." Engine started. Doors closed. The presence that had filled the yard began to withdraw. But Denise remained where she stood, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, watching them leave, not as something escaping, but as something already claimed. Because as the last vehicle pulled away and the quiet returned to the neighborhood, one truth had already settled into place. This was not over. It was already in motion. It was already in motion, and when it arrived, It did not announce itself with chaos. It arrived with precision. The quiet neighborhood that had just begun to settle was interrupted again, not by sirens, but by presence. Black government vehicles moved into the street with controlled intent, their engines low, their movement deliberate. Doors opened in near silence. Men and women in formal attire stepped out, their posture aligned, their expressions unreadable. The air shifted instantly. Sergeant Ryan Blake, who had barely begun to drive away, stopped. His patrol car idled at the curb as he looked back, confusion tightening his expression. "What is this?" he muttered. Officer Kevin Shaw, still seated beside him, leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "That is not local," he said quietly. The vehicles did not hesitate. They stopped directly in front of Denise Carter's home. One of the officials stepped forward, his voice calm, controlled. "Sergeant Blake," he called. The name alone stopped everything. Blake stepped out of the car slowly, his posture no longer rigid, his certainty already slipping. "Yeah, what is this about?" he asked, though his voice lacked its earlier force. The official did not answer him immediately. Instead, he turned toward Denise. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting with unmistakable respect. "We are here." The word landed like a fracture through the moment. Blake's eyes moved sharply between them, his confusion deepening. "Ma'am," he repeated under his breath. Denise stepped forward slightly, her posture unchanged, her composure absolute. "Thank you," she said calmly. Another figure emerged from the vehicle behind the official, a man in uniform, his presence quiet but commanding, his posture precise. "Colonel Androuet." The moment shifted completely. Shaw stepped out of the car immediately, his hands lowering instinctively, his posture tightening into awareness. Blake remained still, his breath uneven now, his mind struggling to align what he was seeing. Hayes approached Denise first, his voice calm. "Denise," he said, "I am here." She met his gaze. "I know," she replied. Then he turned toward Blake. His expression did not change, but the weight of it was unmistakable. "You will step away from your vehicle," Hayes said. There was no volume, no aggression, only command. Blake did not argue. He could not. His body moved before his thoughts caught up, stepping back slowly, his hands no longer steady. I did not know," he said, his voice thinner now. Denise looked at him, her voice calm, unwavering. "You were not required to know," she said. "You were required to act correctly." The distinction settled into him like something final. Around them, the officials moved with quiet precision, documenting, securing, observing. Shaw stood silent, his posture lowered, his earlier hesitation now replaced with full understanding. Blake's shoulders dropped slightly, his certainty collapsing completely. Because in that moment, surrounded by authority he could not challenge, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer his situation. It never had been. And now, there was nothing left to protect him from what came next. There was nothing left to protect him from what came next. And this time, it did not arrive as a warning. It arrived as consequence. Colonel Andrew Hayes did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned slightly to the officials beside him, his tone calm, precise. "Proceed," he said. The word moved through the group instantly. One of the federal agents stepped forward towards Sergeant Ryan Blake, his posture controlled, his expression neutral. "Turn around," he said. Blake hesitated just long enough for the reality to settle fully into him. His shoulders dropped slightly, the last fragments of resistance dissolving. Then he turned. The metallic click of restraints closing around his wrists echoed sharply through the quiet street, louder than anything else that had happened that afternoon. It was the same sound he had relied on to assert control. Now it defined his loss of it. Officer Kevin Shaw stood a few feet away, his posture lowered, his gaze fixed on the ground. "You will remain available for questioning," another official told him calmly. Shaw nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." There was no hesitation, no argument. He understood completely. Blake did not all at once. His voice came out uneven, stripped of certainty. I did not know," he said. Denise Carter stood beside Colonel Hayes, her posture steady, her expression unchanged. Her voice came calm, unwavering. "That was never the requirement," she said. Blake's eyes lifted toward her, searching for something, understanding, perhaps, or a way to undo what had already been done. Denise held his gaze. "You were required to act correctly," she continued. The words settled deeper than anything else could have. Around them, the officials moved with quiet efficiency. Documentation was taken. Statements recorded. The scene that had once been filled with noise was now defined by order. One of the agents stepped forward again, reaching toward Blake's uniform. "Badge," he said. Blake did not respond immediately. His hand moved slowly, guided by the restraint, as the badge was removed with quiet precision. There was no ceremony, no announcement. It was simply taken, and with it, everything it had represented. It was placed aside, no longer a symbol of authority, but a record of its misuse. Blake's posture collapsed further, his breathing uneven, his voice gone. Because in that moment, everything he had relied on, authority, assumption, control, had been stripped away, leaving only consequence. He was guided toward one of the vehicles, his steps slow, unsteady, no longer leading, no longer deciding. No one rushed him. No one needed to. The weight of what had happened carried him forward. Denise did not watch him for long. She did not need to. The outcome had already been decided the moment he chose to act without restraint. And as the door of the vehicle closed behind him, sealing his removal from the scene he once controlled, one truth remained clear for everyone who had witnessed it. This had never been about power. It had been about accountability. And now it had arrived in full. Accountability had arrived in full. And once it settled, the weight that had filled the neighborhood began to lift, not with noise, but with quiet restoration. The black vehicles remained for only a moment longer, their engines low, their presence no longer imposing but precise. One by one, they began to move, pulling away from the curb with the same controlled discipline with which they had arrived. The street slowly returned to itself. The distant hum of everyday life crept back in. Leaves shifting, a door closing somewhere down the block. The soft murmur of voices no longer held in tension. Denise Carter stood where she had been, her posture upright, her composure unchanged. There was no outward reaction, no visible shift in her expression, only stillness, grounded and complete. Colonel Andrew Hayes remained beside her briefly, his presence steady, his tone quiet when he spoke. She acknowledged him with a slight nod. Nothing more was needed. The moment had already said everything. Officer Kevin Shaw stood off to the side, answering quiet questions, his posture lowered, his voice subdued, his earlier hesitation now replaced with understanding. He did not look at Denise again. He did not need to. The lesson had already settled. Slowly, the last of the officials departed, their vehicles disappearing down the street, leaving behind a silence that no longer carried tension, but resolution. Denise turned toward her home, her steps measured, her movements unhurried. The yard was quiet again. The space where chaos had existed only moments before now held stillness once more. She paused briefly near the edge of her porch, her gaze lowering for a moment, not in grief, but in acknowledgement. Then she stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her. Inside, the house felt the same and different. The world had not changed, but something had been corrected. Denise moved through the space with small, deliberate actions, restoring order not just physically, but meaningfully. A chair adjusted, a surface cleared, a routine resumed. Outside, the neighborhood returned to its rhythm, but beneath it, something remained, a quiet understanding that what had happened here would not be forgotten. And as Denise settled back in her home, her presence calm, her composure intact, one truth remained. Justice had not needed to be loud. It had simply needed to arrive. What gives this story its lasting weight is not the scale of the response, but the contrast between impulse and discipline. Officer Blake acted in a moment where emotion replaced judgment, where authority became reaction instead of responsibility. And that single decision did not just end in consequence, it revealed something deeper. About how fragile control, can be when it is not grounded in restraint. Denise Carter did not confront him with force, and she did not need to. She allowed the moment to unfold fully, without interruption, until every action stood on its own, clear and undeniable. What followed was not revenge, and it was not chaos. It was structure. It was order correcting itself. And perhaps that is the quiet truth here. The most dangerous misuse of power is not loud or dramatic. It is confident, unquestioned, and certain of itself, until the moment it is seen clearly. And once it is seen, it cannot remain. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day,